And welcome back. The Parliamentary Section 89 panel of independent experts has found that President Cyril Ramaphosa has a case to answer regarding the Phala Phala farm theft in 2020. Now, with the information presented to it, the panel concluded that President Ramaphosa may have violated the Constitution and committed serious misconduct. Now, the panel found that there is prima facie evidence that the President has a case to answer to Parliament. Ongama Dlabantu from Dlabantu Associates Incorporated joins us now virtually to unpack more of this. Thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live, Ongama.
Thank you, Sakina. Good morning to you and your viewers.
So perhaps a good place to start would be to look at the terms of reference for this particular panel, given that they basically were at pains to state that they did what they were meant to do within the confines of those terms.
Yes. And now, Sakina, the terms of reference of the panel were in terms of Section 129, where they were supposed to consider the evidence before them and to determine whether it was sufficient to present prima facie evidence that the president had a case to answer.
So just in terms of that, the findings that this panel came to, they also made it very clear that there was a lot of information that is out there that was not at their disposal. So the findings that they arrived at is with what was at their disposal.
Yes, that is correct, Sakina. The findings that were, the evidence that was at the disposal of the panel was the submissions of Mr. Arthur Fraser, then the various submissions from the political parties, which would be mainly Mr. Rio Zungula of the ATM, General Bantu Olomisa of the UDM and the EFF.
So, of course, many South Africans are talking to the fact that perhaps, there needs to be a further interrogation of these facts. But, of course, this is where the panel's job stops and the rest of the process is now to unfold. Let's talk about that. Where to from here?
So, where to from here, Sakina, is that the report of the panel must be considered by Parliament. And the Parliament has already released a release saying that they will do so on the 6th of December. And then from there onwards, depending on, of course, on what is found by the Parliament, the report then moves on to the next stage, which would be the committee. Yes, the committee. And then should the committee find that there is indeed a case for the president a case for impeachment, then the next stage then would be Parliament, which would, of course, Sakina, have to determine by a 2/3 majority whether the president is going to be impeached.
So just looking at the findings once more, the president said that the money was proceeds that came from the sale of game on his farm. Now, let's look at that and the findings related to it, because should that be regarded as a form of business, which of course then goes against the section of the Constitution which states that cabinet members and deputy ministers should not engage in any paid work?
So, Sakina, that is one of the most contentious aspects of the report of the panel. I say so because when one looks at the reason for the findings, they say that the president was a member of a CC, and accordingly, he was not supposed to be engaged in any paid work. Now, from the side of the president, he says that he had placed all of his business interests in a blind trust, and so he feels that the trading of a game was not an income-generating expenditure. If now one takes a deeper dive into the findings of the panel, they say that the reason for their finding is that as a member of the CC, the president had earned an income by getting dividends from the CC, albeit he had claimed that the farm was not making any money. And the finding of the panel was that there was no evidence to support the fact that the farm was in fact loss-making. So in terms of that, then they found that the president would have violated Section 96 by engaging in paid work.
All of that notwithstanding, whether the farm was operating profitably or at a loss, the fact of the matter is the amount of foreign currency that is in question here, regardless of which amount you are more likely to believe it was, is also contentious.
Yes, Sakina, that is also contentious. The claim from the president was that the amount was $580,000 US dollars. Now, when one considers the report of the panel, they say that the money was stashed in a sofa. And when they consider all the evidence available to them in totality, they find that in all probability, the amount that was in there was more than $580,000. They say so based on the statement of one of the alleged thieves, who states that he had taken about $800,000 because the domestic worker told him that he must make sure that he leaves some money behind.
So that in itself is interesting. And of course, there is an admission to this point as well. Now, that also brings into question the role of our very own law enforcement entities and others in the value chain with regard to that amount of foreign currency that is being kept by any individual. Because the South African Reserve Bank, they had in August, at the end of August, responded to a question to Floyd Chibambu of the EFF about this particular matter, but we haven't heard anything since. We haven't heard from SARS, and I can imagine SARS will tell us that they don't discuss people's private business with us, but all the same, the panel in making these pronouncements point out that these are some of the scopes that they did not have any insight into. The police, for their part, the Hawks, what is their latest response to this? Because we've been waiting for the public protector. All of this has been outstanding. And as the public, the questions have been asked, Ongama, about where are these investigations and crickets.
Yes, Sakina, one would have to be very concerned about the silence given the serious public interest in this matter. But yesterday or the day before yesterday, the Hawks released an update regarding their pending cases. And one of the statements that they made, Sakina, is that they are currently seized with this Phala Phala matter. And at that stage, they had collected about 68 affidavits. That is with regards to the Hawks. Now, with regards to the other agencies, such as the South African Reserve Bank, the FIC, the panel, as you said, had said that they were constrained because they didn't have access to that information. But due to the time factor, they had to proceed to release the report without having sight of all those other reports, other matters that are subject to investigations, which of course would include the public protector. And from the side of the public protector had said that she is busy with the investigation, and due to the seriousness of the matter, she would of course not be able to complete it within that stipulated period. So when one looks at it, one really does have reason to be concerned because an ordinary member of the public would suspect that there is some sort of cover-up going on.
So, and that is, of course, of serious concern to the broader public because everybody is seized with the matter, but there doesn't seem to be any specific update on any movement from any of these entities. Is that acceptable in any way?
one would have to look at it, Sakina, in the broader sense of how our criminal justice system generally functions. One is always surprised if it is done expeditiously, mainly for all sorts of reasons, which in the main, one would hear them blaming a lack of resources. For instance, when the Hawks were giving their report, they were saying that they've only filled up to 50% of their capacity. And due to then staffing shortages, they always struggle to complete cases on time.
Okay, let's say for just a moment that that is acceptable. We accept the shortcomings of the Hawks, of the Public Protector's Office, and whoever else would cry about not having sufficient capacity to deal with this. What about the South African Reserve Bank? What about the FIC? What about SARS? What could their excuse be in terms of not updating us on what is going on here?
Yes. With regards to SARS, Sakina, as you rightfully said, we all know that SARS will always hide behind the issue of evidentiality. And now, if one then was to look at the South African Reserve Bank, they have already furnished the president with their first set of questions, which the president answered in time according to them. And subsequent to that, they issued him a follow-up set of questions. Now, that is where you rightfully said we would have a cause for concern, because ever since that point, we haven't had any further update regarding to the progress of the matter. And then the FIC, one then would also suspect that the FIC will be functioning under the same modus operandi, so to put it, as SARS, Sakina, where they claim that due to the sensitivity of the information that they work with, they have to, of course, exercise confidentiality.
The Hawks at this point, in terms of that investigation, again, it's not clear where this is at. We know that Arthur Fraser opened a case. This was in June. We are now in December. And given all of the information that was furnished by him, and we heard how the panel, the independent panel, worked through that information, one would have expected then that other authorities would have been able to work with what they have at their disposal and come to some sort of conclusion, or at least show us some sort of progress by now. Do you think that this report and the handing over of this report to Parliament at this point would put those entities under pressure at this point?
I don't think so, Sakina. And the reason why is because when one looks at how the report treats the evidence of Mr. Arthur Fraser, it states that the evidence of Mr. Arthur Fraser is hearsay evidence. And then they made findings based on probabilities, where they say that, yes, the evidence of Mr. Arthur Fraser is hearsay evidence, but at the right time, they assume that then he would be able to name his sources. So if one then takes that into consideration, one would then assume that that is the challenge that the other investigating authorities are seized with, in that then they are struggling to take the investigations further in the absence of the identity of the identities of the people who gave the information to Arthur Fraser to begin with.
And that is very interesting, but we're going to leave it there because this matter comes before Parliament next week, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as well. But Ongama Dlabantu, thanks so much for your time this morning. And Ongama is with Dlabantu Associates Incorporated, sharing his viewpoints after the Parliamentary Section 89 panel of independent experts found that President Cyril Ramaphosa has a case to answer regarding the Phala Phala farms theft in 2020.